And we are officially alive. Welcome. So I wanted to get together with Johannes because he put out a video that struck me as in some sense, it's, I don't know if it named something. It named something on the horizon, and then brought a bunch of things together in pretty original ways. And what was that? What did you call it? What was the name of the video?
Oikonomia Scolaire.
Oikonomia Scolaire.
Oikonomia Scolaire.
Oikonomia Scolaire.
Yes.
Yes. So from the title, that should be obvious to everybody.
It's basically, we could just end the video here. Self-explanatory. Yeah. Well, thanks very much then. Goodbye.
Yes. So this is brought, and I think one of the things that struck me is it brought a bunch of things together that we've been talking about, right?
Yeah.
And a bunch of things together, and I had the sense in which, and especially as this is when you talked about, all right, enough critiques, no more critiques. Yeah. Let's build something. And especially what was interesting to me is this, well, one, the idea of building something with thinking.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And to build something in Scolaire, which Scolaire is, the more I understand Scolaire, the more, the deeper that is. Like whatever that school is, I'd love to like touch on Scolaire a bit. And then what you talked about with time, and specifically the future, and the way you connected. In some sense, you were talking about the utter consumptive part of what happens when the future is debt, right? This connection that you made between debt and the future of temporality, right? Becoming what we're all inside of, and the insanity of the markets. And because I had just actually watched a Frontline, some series of the Frontline that went over the whole 2008 collapse. And what was interesting is I didn't realize it was talking about 2008. I just wasn't paying that much attention to the beginning of it. I thought it was actually talking about what was happening right now with COVID and the markets and the inundation. But this was actually just, I think they made that in 2009, 2010, something like that. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, they're talking about 2008. They're not talking about now, because like nothing's changed. So this whole thing about debts and buying more debt and then selling it and all of this crazy stuff I had just listened to.
And they're all magicians. Yeah, we have to be very clear, right? I mean, speaking crudely as an economist for a second.
Yeah.
Economist hat.
Yeah.
Central bankers are magicians. They're basically public relations guys.
Yeah.
And that's more or less it. So there's but yeah, so we can get into the future and that, etc. But it's what happened in 2008, 2009 would have been, you could say should have been perhaps the moment when a certain amount of collapse should have been allowed. But it was increased to a level what no one saw would be possible, which is negative interest rates. I mean, and that increases debt. So to have negative interest rate is de facto disappropriation. Yeah. Because if you don't have, and it's just crude economic reality. We don't even have to go into this, nothing philosophical. The fact is, if you have $10,000 in your bank account and you don't get any interest on your savings.
Yeah.
Even if it's just 0%, inflation will just eat purchasing power.
Yeah.
Away from it. And it
Right.
so those are just, I remember back then, 2008-9, I actually studied economics in Italy, in the US, and so we were then children of the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I remember conversations that we had back then. Well, this crisis is going to completely kill us, and what are we going to do? And others were a bit more relaxed, and they said, well, but when we're out of university, the crisis will be over. But there's something astonishing, of course, about the word crisis itself, and this is where it maybe gets more philosophical now already, is the question, why is there crisis after crisis after crisis that is then, by the way, prolonged, right? There's a housing crisis. In the UK, there's a crisis with the NHS, which is the National Health Service. And that crisis is as old as the NHS itself. The Queen at this point, I mean, how many prime ministers has the Queen seen? She's 95 years old now, I think. She's probably seen 10 prime ministers or so. And she must have, it must be a madhouse. They come to her every Sunday and say, oh, we're going to solve the social housing crisis, and we're going to solve the NHS crisis. Then we have, when we talked about this, we did talk about this last year, you and I. What is a crisis? A crisis, or krinein, Greek, can be or should be a moment of decision. The strange thing about our crisis is it isn't. It just leads to more critique from one side or the other, which leads to a false dialectic, a mirror play, ultimately, where even those who critique basically just look for material goodies within that system of critique. And we can go on and on and on and talk about capitalism versus communism. Which one is better? And you know exactly what this leads to, right? The one will be, there's capital and capital, or then there are the accelerationists who would say, well, the logic of capital is this, then, and the other, and they're all spinicists. So there's never a way of leaving the substance of capital behind, and or even go as far as saying that even if that's true, that capital itself, which is what accelerationists will say, is critique. So it finds, through escape routes, it finds more ways of reproducing itself. And this is so abstract. Does anyone really even know what that means? But there are other ways, regardless of all, and I'm at a point where I just think, okay, how many academics complain or critique and write books about neoliberalism? Well, I would probably guess at this point 95% of anyone in the humanities. That's a wild guess, probably completely wrong. It's probably less, but anyways. Well, who do they work for? One of the most neoliberal institutions at the moment in the world, the university system. That to me is striking. Why are they either? So to me, it's just a performance at this point, right? To be an academic, for me at this point, for most part, not for everyone, but for the most part, you're just performing an empty gesture. And it has an aesthetic value. You get a nice little title. You can put on a vest, and anyway. So I think but they can't, and it's all very, you can find all kinds of interesting critiques of capital and of communism, etc. Or we could just begin, perhaps, to ask ourselves, first of all, why is the economic problem so prevalent today? If, as some would claim, we are richer than ever before, at least materially, and why? And I don't think that the question of time is either time is just a parameter, or it doesn't even But there are, I think in the video you mentioned, I talk about warpings of time, fissuring time. time. Almost, it's not destroying time, but it's certainly tempocidal to a certain degree to keep betting on the future and make bets on these bets on the future. Derivatives, which were once proclaimed as, and this is quite reminiscent, by the way, to the Bitcoin movement at the moment. Derivatives, when they came out, I mean, they've been around for hundreds of years. So the derivatives are bets. In a very simple sense, one of the first bets that we know of was trade ships in Venice 500-600 years ago. When they left, some Italian started betting whether that ship will return or not. They had an insurance policy, and someone started betting on the insurance policy. If you find someone else to bet with you, I'll bet you 10 gold coins that they're not going to return, etc. So that's a derivative. But then, in a simple sense, this is a bit more complex. But ultimately, this is now it's been automated, complexified, and there are trillions of derivatives hurling around this planet. Bets on bets on bets.
Wow.
So anyone who's interested in this, very good film, The Big Short, explains this as well. Derivatives. And they were, however, rolled out in this massive scale to have a riskless world, right? Which ultimately is a world that's without death.
Yeah.
That's basically always what this means.
Yeah.
Without finitude.
Yeah.
And I think, and to a large degree, or to some extent, it works. And I'm not saying this will all collapse or so. It's not about this doomsaying, but I do think it does something to temporality. It does something to our experiencing of time. Yeah. And that's more important, right? You usually, when someone points this out, you have to say, and it's all going to collapse. That's the usual, It's not about collapse, because collapse would be, at least it would be cathartic, I hope. There is, this was all insane. Let's try and have a relationship with time that's not completely nuts.
Yeah.
This is much worse than collapse, because we don't see it. You don't see the sky falling. You don't see, the prices drop of everything, and everything going to zero, which is one of the big worries too. No, it warps perhaps our understanding of time to be completely futural all the time. And at the same time, that future is becoming almost a black block, which can only be pushed further away with another layer of more derivatives and bets, etc. But to see this doesn't mean to say that this is inevitable, this is always going to continue, but to see it and then to release it into its own, perhaps. You have to affirm it. You have to say yes and no at the same time. Yes to affirm, and affirming just means that this is occurring. It does this to time. It does this to our understanding of time. And then to return to another question. And actually, so I have a background in economics. I studied economics and philosophy. Was always flabbergasted with, you mentioned 2008, 2009. I had professors who had PhDs from Harvard, and I asked them in 2010, why are we still learning in macroeconomics the same models that have led to this major economic crisis? The response I got from one of them was, because it's the truth. The unquestioned, undoubtable truth. So you see this relationship with time that's prevalent here is, you have a model that was set up maybe in the 60s or in the 70s, in which was valid in some states in America, is now being used 40 years later in all of Europe. Because if you have a warped understanding of time, then you just go, let's just apply this model anywhere, because there is no difference anyways, right? It's all perfectly identical. And at the same, I think also that you're right, this has continued. This, if you want to call this progression, that happened here, and something that triggered. I mean, and I've always been interested in otium or leisure or scolaire. We'll talk about this a bit as well. But I last year during the first lockdown, Mark Anderson, who is, I don't know actually who he is. I think he's one of the major founders or so, or venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, who for some reason follows me on Twitter and I follow him. And that's why he follows, I think, probably 30,000 people. So, I don't know why. I think it may have been because during the first lockdown, there was so much going on. And I think maybe his team, they follow, people who've got momentarily something to say. And he wrote a piece back then, which was "It's Time to Build." And I remember reading it, and he wasn't wrong about anything, but mostly what he was discussing was the material side of everything, right? The material, what was lacking. If only we had more stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I responded, "It's time to think." And that was a first piece on Scolaire, in a more or less in an attempt to make this more accessible, because what we have to get away from, and you can, by the way, interrupt me anytime, but I think what we have to get away from is the work leisure, or this materialistic understanding of leisure that we're also of Scolaire. So I'm not trying to say we'll reach a moment where we will have enough. That's the basic mistake that capitalists and Marxists or communists and whatever make, is the assumption that if only, in all of them, John Maynard Keynes as well, Bertrand Russell in his Praise of Idleness, right? Praise of Idleness. And he says, 1920s, we will have technique that's so powerful that then finally, when everything is automated, an artist will be able to do art without starving, etc. But it's not about abandoning work. It's not about having a new program like UBI. UBI is a program, and we moderns like programs. So, here's a problem. Here's a program. It's not going to solve anything, but it's going to brush over it. UBI will ultimately, is there, if it even comes, or if it's even possible, is going to be a program to keep people fed when they are out of work, because everything is being automated. That's a program. None of this is a program. This is an attempt to, as you also said, building through thinking, a way of, or ways of being, also an economia, so a house of the nomos, an economy that's entirely grounded in Scolaire and divided from, or not even open to, because it will be a different, it requires a different understanding of being, one that we don't have. That's predicated on finding a stance, if you like, to speak with Heidegger, in the midst of beings, which, however, is itself always momentary. And to quote Leah Edmonds, she was a student in my Heidegger course just now, and last night she gave a talk on Antigone, and she called Antigone the priestess of being. And she said that Antigone is eigentlich unheimlich, authentically or properly unhomely or uncanny, because she finds and makes herself a home in the uncanny, and also in the face of death. So these are talking about momentariness. And I'll read something from a book in a second to make this maybe a bit clearer what I'm trying to say. So I'm not saying we will have a beautiful utopia at the end of some golden or not so golden path, if we only do this, that, and the other, and fulfill all these parameters or conditions. There will still be hardship. This is not what this is about. There will also be poverty. This is not what this is about. This is a question of sufficiency, of finding a measure of sufficiency, which, interestingly, there isn't, of course, in a system that is always exponentially growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why would arriving in communism all of a sudden liberate us from a fundamental lack, if that's what everything is predicated on? If first the economic
Yeah.
who's to say that this is now, we now know we have a measure of sufficiency that we found now that must be established almost a priori. I mean, that of course is difficulty, but
yeah. Wow. So Scolaire.
Yeah.
So to be a ground in Scolaire. So when you say Scolaire, what do you mean?
So I mean, the traditional translation is leisure, which is French and means license, a license to be free from work, which is why I tend to I tend to prefer idleness, because idleness is not laziness, but has got more of a sense of a bit of a disheveled gentleman who takes his freedom and is suspended on a swing. That's not quite what Scolaire is at all, of course.
Right.
But in order to the way in which, so of course, I'm not going to. I think actually the issue begins with Aristotle. I think this dialectic is set up by Aristotle, that we need to work and then enjoy free time, or scolaire, through ascolia, through non-scolaire. But let's just say this to make this maybe a bit at least partially graspable. Scolaire is already there. Let's put it like this.
Yeah.
We're already in Scolaire.
Yeah.
And Scolaire is a measure of sufficiency, which is not to say there's 1 meter, and that 1 meter is the perfect scholastic meter, which if we apply it will
Yield.
Is this Scolaire? Yeah, fits right in. No.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
No, but is in the, to speak like a Greek or so, in the tempest of the elemental forces that make up the earth and the world. We need to have some way of measuring ourselves and everything. So not quantified, right? But to find measure. I don't know if this old sense of the word is still present in people's heads, but people's minds. So, in such a way that there can be found a momentary balance, a momentary groundedness, that lets us know that what there is already enough. Because as you know, the logic of money is that you always need more. But at the same time, it would be, so we go. I'm going to read something in a second. So maybe if you want to ask something now, I'll find this passage.
Yeah, it's like something. I mean, in the writing I've done, about Scolaire, it's interesting. Kind of, it really does open up. It's one of those things. I agree. I think you actually have to kind of. You have to learn what the word actually means. You can't just translate it, because it's getting at something. It's getting at these dimensions that just these other translations don't speak. And the sense I got from it, I guess that the part where Scolaire means, or the word it comes from, means some version of holding, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? And this is where time comes in, of like where, and it's really interesting to think about like the modern understanding of time being kind of this force, this objective force, whereas Scolaire is a way of where something about the way that you respond to time The way you hold time is the way time then turns and holds you, right?
Yeah. Do continue.
Yes.
Sorry.
And so it's this, and if you could look at it in terms of like, one way to talk about it is like where, you could say, means and end, there's no process anymore. Like what you're doing is precisely the end of what you're doing, right? So like Aristotle says, do theoria in Scolaire, right? These notions of these, you could say, and then I think it was in Plato talked about, I think had Socrates talk about like, look, I don't think you should kill me. You should just, I think Athens just should pay for me being in Scolaire all the time, right? This notion of philosophy happening in Scolaire, but my what I can got from that is that, oh, it's a kind of time that in which we're right now. Time, I think we think about time as it just goes on, right? And it doesn't know about us, does not know about us. It's just this force of some kind. Whereas the Greeks really had a sense in that, which no, like time directly concerns us. And the way that we concern for it is the way it reveals itself and then holds us. So that's how I've understood Scolaire.
Yes. So you mentioned holding or having, this is as so. The strangest thing to witness with oneself, if one begins to think, and it's rare that we do, is that whatever we think, we can think in, this is simplifying it, but in two ways we can, and both of them are to a certain degree are necessary. So there's not to say that one is more important than the other. Everything. So there is, of course, it's not to say there is no material reality of to Scolaire, and that if you are extremely wealthy, then of course perhaps having leisure in this ordinary sense is more easily possible because you have more of a license to be free. But the question is, of course, whether the time space that's opened up to you is at all more more genuine, or whether you are open to anything occurring in that as well, or whether there, and the other way, so there are always two ways. There's the external one, which is, with Heidegger is ontic, you can see it. There's the innere, the internal, and with similar with same with Scolaire, you can see the two ways of thinking the phenomenon through, and both of them get at something, but we need to kind of not combine, but let one not one take over. And I think what we've done is take over the purely materialistic side, where, and so to give maybe an example that makes this more to let something appear. We speak of the human being as the rational animal, and we don't even think when we say this. This is a metaphysical notion, the animal rationale in Latin. That's a translation of, which is something, by the way, Aristotle never said. So this is attributed to Aristotle. Zoon logon echon. He never uses, I think, this exact phrase, but around the body of Aristotelia and the scholastics, they attribute this to him. But even let's take this as a notion or a way of thinking the human being, right? And thinking means seeing.
Yeah.
Right? An artist doesn't. A great artist does not express his or her subjective feelings, but a great artist sees and hears. Zoon logon echon. Echon is echein, the verb echein, which is the ground verb for skole.
Say that one more time. I want to catch that.
Echein is to have and to hold, and that's the ground verb that you mentioned also for skole.
Yeah.
And so zoon logon echon, zoon is living being, logon is logos, echein is to have and to hold. So an external way of translating this is indeed, well, animal and reason or rationality. And reason is, of course, being able to calculate. But where's the echein? Is echein just having? You know, there's questions of what's the relationship between to have and to be. Are they really contradictory? And does having always just have to mean possessing, as if an external quality or property? Or is zoon logon echon not rather the living being that finds and holds itself in a stance in logos and through logos? And that means, again, of course, the gathering openness to speaking and saying, which is letting show and showing.
Yeah. It's like, it's like holding what it's like holding something in intimacy that's dispossessed, right? It's already dispossessed, but yeah.
And so the external way of saying this is it just becomes almost a self-evident label. You know, that's just, well, that's just, you know, that's just him. He's just a rational animal.
Yeah.
Bad joke. You know, you're picking. I'm trying to be
too highly of me.
What?
You speak too highly of me.
Oh yes, no, yeah.
Right.
No, just, you know, try to tend to the American audience here.
Yes, yes.
He's just that kind of rational animal kind of type of guy.
Yeah.
All types in America, no individuals. Just, you know.
Yes, yes.
Wake up, you in your language. Or every single time we say zoon logon echon, we try to show that there is a living being that tries to find a stance in logos. And then we have to say, what is logos? And these questions open up again and again, times of grounding oneself. And if you then, and this is now going a bit experimental, but if you say, you know, why not? Zoon logon Scolaire, that's a made-up verb, but is the living being that finds itself in the logos of Scolaire. And so none of, so again, we have, when we talked about, this is a year, I don't know when this was, maybe a year ago. So when we talked with John Verveke, I remember John saying that he has often difficulty to describe to his students and others that he's neither talking about a dystopia nor a utopia, but modes of being that are in the advent, that are coming to us, and they are themselves momentary. And this is a deeply Greek understanding of life, of being, etc. Here's a book I'd highly recommend anyone who's interested in tragedy or Greek philosophy, etc. Goethe and the Greeks, written in 1941.
Wow.
When scholars were still scholars and they still knew ancient Greek. So here, in all there seems, so he says here that the Greeks appreciate a feeling for measure, proportion, in Greek, meden agan. Meden means nothing, agan too much. So nothing too much, not too much of anything. Maybe it's better English. So what they were about then is that meden agan, however, is not a static law of proportion. There would be this, you know, we've solved the economic problem. Now that we've solved it and we have UBI or full communism or full capitalism or whatever it is, we can do, we can be, you know, fully liberated, etc., etc. No, so not a static law of proportion. in art or of moderation in life, but Goethe understands this, and the Greeks too, as a dynamic tendency to control the too expansive life force and concentrate it into defined channels. So, but this is momentary.
Right.
To take this life force, the elemental forces, etc., and concentrate them into defined channels again and again.
It's the opposite of the economy, of the current economy. It's like literally that describes the exact opposite.
Yeah. Say more.
Well, it's just this sense of, well, the sense of measure that he was talking about, that Goethe had a handle on, or an understanding of an awareness of the over surplus or overabundance of life, right? And responding to it in such a way that it concentrated that abundance into a something defined, that sense of ratio, right? Ration. And then with what we just talked about with this endless debt, right, that's built on each other, it's almost the exact opposite of that. That's what struck me in what you said.
Yeah, it's here's the strange thing. Meden agan, so not too much of nothing, too much, not too much of anything, is so maybe think of it like this, the elemental forces, and they are chaotic, they are in chaos, which means abyss. But we also stand, of course, in logos, and there is a certain rationing, but not just purely calculative. And in these different forces throughout them, how they work out, they are channeled, forced almost sometimes in one direction. And then, of course, once that is channeled in one direction, there's a turning. And they burst out again, and they need to be channeled again in another way, in a new way.
And that's what we could always be responding to. And
so and at the same time, you could, of course, but this, and I think you said this yourself anyways, that this channeling, to use the word from Trevelyan, but at the same time measured, knowing that certain things cannot be controlled, that the ultimate life is ultimately tragic, because death cannot be resolved, because there is the Denos also, the terrifying, the horrifying, over which the human being has no control. When all of a sudden the earth just opens up, right? There's no theodicy. We're not good German Protestants here, like Leibniz and Hegel and all the other Germans, except for Heidegger, of course, who just try to justify the goodness of the world. Leibniz, there's an earthquake in Lisbon, complete destruction of the city almost. And here's why everything is fine, because this is the best of all possible worlds. Just like Hegel does not allow for the romantics and their notion of evil, or for horror stories, which will already come. Why is horror so? And so there is something in modernity where we do recognize this, right? Horror stories. And evil is just the way in which evil shows itself here is it's just evil because there's no sense to it. There's no reason why, right? There's like the Joker in the Batman, the dark Batman trilogy from the mid 2000s. There's no origin story of the Joker. He keeps lying about his way. My mother would. He hasn't. Nothing is true. And that is what Hegel does not allow for. But the earth can just open up all of a sudden and destroy and take, and in the next second give again. All right. This just happened in Germany with this major flooding, which is no longer reported on, interestingly, even though there's 40 kilometers of complete destruction.
Right.
There's almost no one, there's, to my knowledge, no thinker or no intellectual in Germany who picks up on this. This is this would have been disastrous, but I think we don't even see this anymore as this extremely disastrous, because how can we control for this going forward? How can we find measures of control so that this never happens again? What kind of an abstraction is to blame for this occurrence, right? It's always some sort of a weird abstraction that we then can solve for in a formula, which is never the acceptance of there are elemental life forces. They are what make the world beautiful and at the same time terrifying.
Yeah.
They are what give and what take. And it's the strangest thing, though, is in this world of superlatives and extreme optimization, there is, it seems, rarely any genuine exuberance or joy, or anything in abundance, or great richness of itself. It has already to announce itself, everything as new or improved or optimized. But where's and I think the joylessness is also connected with the warping of time, just to leap around a bit. But and being able, and of course we could say, Bataille says this about capitalism. I don't know if that's true, but he says it is ultimately, it is this kind of, I don't think it is, because it crowds out, so that it is, it's excessive, and it's excessive for no reason. And there's, I do see that, but I also think that at the same time, it's not just about excess. It's about finding this measure and finding it again and again. And that would be maybe this, building towards or building from an oikonomia Scolaire.
Just what you said, I'm noticing just what you said about this sense of, these that the chaos, essentially, these fundamental elements, an awareness of their fatalness, right? And that, in some sense, channeling it or bringing it into measure, knowing that it's gonna, what I heard you say is it's gonna then turn and pop back out again, and then you'll have to respond to it in the same way. This awareness, or this respect, which is interesting, spectacle, to relook, right, has this the measuring. It's interesting, as I think about that, I get this sense of looking and responding in this way that's constantly back and forth. It's respectful. It's like a moving towards something and an awareness that it could kill you, but yet it's beautiful and striking, so you want to move forward. All of this going back and forth in the responsiveness to that, right? And I just kind of, I can feel that sense of, it's almost like the ideal place to stand, right? In some sense, it's like, that's well, I mean, if you look at it to put it in a different context, but when people talk about a flow state, that's essentially what they're talking about, right? There's something that's beyond your ability, or fatal to whatever it is that you're doing, that's just beyond your capability, but so you reach towards it, and in the reaching is the becoming capable of it, right? And so there's that sense of what they talk about, a different kind of time opens up. So I was just noticing as I was tracking everything that you were saying, I was noticing myself go like, oh yeah, and bringing in those connections.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So, but also this other thing that you talked about, which is this, because this is one of the things I've been asking myself, and I think essentially I'm realizing, without really understanding it or knowing it explicitly, when we talk about when we're encircling, when we talk about like really getting someone's world, in some sense, I think what I've been listening for without quite knowing it in some sense is like, what are they responding to? Because if I know what they're responding to, right, the person's responding to, I can actually understand and really hear them. But if I don't know what they're responding to, but here's the thing is like what they're responding to is quite mysterious, even to them, right? So just that sense of the sense in which we are always already in a response, right? I think Heidegger would say we're always in a response to our understanding of being, right? Or our non-understanding being, as this be the case.
Yeah.
This double sense, I think what it is there's this double sense in which this gathering into logos, right? Into the measure with an awareness, that it'll turn, it'll pop back out. That sense of that second popping and that second having to do that again from out of this seems like another, that just knowing that that's going to happen again and that kind of respectfulness seems like a different, that's a different way of responding, knowing that that's going to happen again, right? That's interesting to me, striking to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so in terms of the response, I think
does it feel like I'm understanding? Like does it feel like I heard and I'm responding to what you said?
Yeah, but let me try to on responding. So something I mentioned in the piece as well is so there's much talk about growth, right? And when our economy is predicated on growth, we need to grow. And now there's talk of, as a response to excessive growth, of degrowth, of deflating, of a need to scale down completely, reducing, basically, or so-called sustainable growth, right? Mm-hmm. But there never seems to be a question, well, what is growth?
Yeah.
It's either morally right or morally wrong. It's moralized.
Yeah.
And something I noticed when I wrote the piece and I looked up the word for wucher, and so the English word is usury. This is I'm building towards the way to respond,
mm-hmm.
And the different ways of responding. So wucher is usury, and usury, of course, has extremely negative, also moralistic connotations, right? But let's stay with wucher. Wucher, in Indo-Germanic roots, means to grow and to enhance. It also has to do with wucher. Then 1,000 years ago in Old High German means fruit, the fruit of a plant and the fruit of an animal, and offspring and progeny. So wucher is not just usury in this sense of demanding interest on money or living off money with more money or so, right? Yeah. But of course, at the same time, and this is, by the way, also the Greek word is tokos. They also knew earning capital. I mean, one of the first options trader was a philosopher, Thales. The first philosopher was also the first options trader. He bet on the harvest and the yield of olive trees and made a fortune, and then he could philosophize. So there is a connection between understanding time and philosophy. So there's, I mean, what's new, of course, is the extreme speed at which this occurs, etc. All this is new, but the way in which we respond to growth is one that is, in simplified terms, is ultimately too linear or linear purely, or then of course exponential, which is its own weird form of linearity, if you like. It's growth that doesn't know decay. It's growth that doesn't know its own, overall, of course, everything will always keep growing, but it's to an external stance to take, and it's a responding to growth. You've grown up. I mean, you're right. Let's say the opposite. I mean, everything. Trees grow and then they decay. The moment, this is Tonati had pointed this out, another student in the Heidegger course, the moment, we can't say the second, right? But the moment, the Augenblick, where the flower is in full bloom, is the moment when the flower, say the rose, begins to die. If we had a response to growth and to yield and to fruit and to fruitfulness, that could be able to think like this again, which is not dialectical, right, but is one of simultaneity, or equiprimordiality also of certain phenomena. Then we would have a different, because you can see, right, so we need more growth. Why do you need more growth? Well, because we need a higher GDP. Well, why do you need a higher GDP? Well, because we need to pay all our debt. Why did you have so much debt? Well, because we wanted all that GDP. Right? So, okay, that's insane. And the response to that is, of course, then on the other extreme, which also doesn't understand growth, is to say, well, let's have no growth. Let's have degrowth. Let's kill everything. Let's burn everything down so that we don't have any growth. It's highly apocalyptic. And so we take off the moralistic lens where Aristotle basically started that also, right? His extreme hatred on those who use money to earn money, etc. That's not really the issue. The issue is, that can be an issue, but the real question to me is, how can we begin to think growth? So that we let something grow of its own accord without attempting to control that growth fully. Because when you look at the way we understand growth, it's in a graph. And it only knows one direction. Right? And this is ultimately, this is a form of insanity to say that the Dow Jones is now at 30,000 points compared to when it started. Has there nothing happened in between? Is this just the same Dow Jones? And of course, we have to have insurance against that too, and we need to need all kinds of policies to keep all of this going. Or we could simply try and find, so maybe we go to, this is something we've talked about before, to go to Heraclitus and the understanding of harmony. Similar to what Trevelyan here says in respect to Goethe, that harmony, the most beautiful Kalisten harmony, and the most beautiful comes about from that which to antixun, that which is standing or is being apart, coming together. And the most dissonant also conjoining together, forming the most beautiful harmony. Of course, the Greek doesn't even need a subject, and it doesn't need a verb here either, at least in that fragment that we have. But this momentary balance, or to quote Hölderlin, right? Is there a measure on the earth? Or this is from the Rhine, and I only know the German is tanzen das Brautfest, Menschen und Götter, es tanzen die Lebenden all, und ausgeglichen ist eine Weile das Schicksal. And I have to look for, sorry, just a second, the English translation for that one, because I think it may help to understand. But then gods and men and all living things will celebrate their bridal feast. You see, so there's a marriage between mortals and immortals, and between everything that's alive. Will celebrate their bridal feast, and fate is held for that while in balance, for that while. And it's so, we want, economics today is all about equilibrium, finding equilibria. But these are the natural states for them, right? For the models, it always just reverts back to the equilibrium. No, it doesn't just revert back to it. We have to respond in such a way that we understand growth and the intricacies and the ramifications and how it spins out and overturns itself, etc., so that we can find for that while a balance of the fates. And it's, I think, fundamentally crucial or important, precisely because, as we've said now, it distorts time. And if time is distorted in such a fundamental way, then it's almost like we're trying to work with time, but at the same time freeze time. That's just, the whole, I don't know, maybe I'm just, but I find everything so, this we are in a very strange time anyways, where we seem to be looking towards the future, right? Much more than ever before. We predict the future all the time. I mean, the stock market is just that. It's just a prediction of the future. It's a bet on the future. And the huge amounts of data that are gathered by Google and YouTube and all the other, Microsoft and all the other, they're used to predict the future outcomes of the election, future outcomes of markets. This is so, to me, it's uncanny, to put it mildly. And if only maybe we could understand this uncanniness as uncanny, and so none of them. I'm not saying let's tear everything down or let's have this kind of ism or that kind of ism. No, but let's understand that what it is that we're actually at all doing, and how if we respond to a phenomenon like growth in the way that we do with the false understanding of time. I think it's a false understanding of time that we have, which is, as you said, it's just this stretched out thing that's just available.
Right.
Or like I think you said subjective force.
Objective force.
Maybe that's not quite it.
Totally. This is really giving me a sense of like, because I was wondering about where, because I've been playing with this idea, and is actually in writing about Scolaire, about this way that it seems like when we talk about meaning, we usually talk about it in terms of like, it was the most meaningful time in my life. Like there's this way that time and meaning are just deeply coupled, and I'm getting a sense of this here, right? And what happens essentially when you were talking about it here, where I kind of was starting to play with is like, well, okay, if time now becomes this objective force, right? This thing that's just going on that we can, or like the availability of it or something like that, it no longer holds us. Therefore, it can't be meaningful by definition. We can't respond to it in a way that it responds back in any way, right? And therefore you just kick meaning out of time, right? Totally. So all of this kind of sense, this sense of responding to time, and what's interesting about what you're saying is like, actually, this isn't you're not talking about a construction, right? You're not, when you say build, right? You're not talking about a mental construct that we then live inside of something, right?
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Right. But it's more like, what I'm hearing is it's more like a recognition of what's already always the case, right? In a way of observing because this is, I mean, what you're talking about too, just this sounds very much like you can observe the way a plant grows, right? And the other part of this, and of course this makes sense because, you know, what I know with, I'm going to be having a talk with John about, like, he's got kind of a, come up with a, like a phenomenological account of the notion of knowledge as conformity, right? Not knowing about, or, but this way where knowledge is, you know, this Neoplatonic sense, right? That to know is to come in conformity with, right? This very much just feels like that to me, right? So in some sense, that measure, right, there's a stepping back and leaning forward, right, knowing I have something to do with what's happening, I'm responding to it and bringing it into measure, but also noticing I'm not in total control of it, right? And it could just turn around and like kill me at any point, right? And I respect it for that. But at the same time, that very respect has me be able to be measured with it, right? But with this understanding that it's going to turn and then come back up. Yet the last time I don't know if it's like the last time I did it, but every iteration of that, I'm in some sense more conformed to that very pattern, right? It's like it's in some sense, it's like it seems like the way that we like the way that De Janeiro talks about the psyche when he's translating Heraclitus, like talking about the psyche is simply the openness, our openness to the logos, right? I'm feeling an openness to this, and it's so what you're talking about isn't a construction or a building like a construction. It's like a way of seeing what's already here and conforming with what's already here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, of course, we have to be careful with the word conformity, right? Because that has, you know, politically extreme, also can have very
Totally.
negative connotations. But in this way that you, so I think it was clear enough,
Yeah.
the way in which you explained it. But to conform, or to form together, or you can maybe also say co-respond.
Co-respond, yeah.
To what there is, and what there is not just simply given.
Yeah.
It is, and in our response, though, there's an echo. And then you mentioned respect,
Yeah.
or there are echoes from the way in which we respond to something. By the way, to build comes from to, or is connected to dwell, and to be, to exist, and to grow. And to stay with the Greeks, the elemental forces are there, if you like to speak in terms of, you know, forces, etc., which is a poetic way of speaking. And that's it, and we are at once held by them, but also overpowered. And to build through thinking perhaps means, so it does not mean to have a blueprint up and or to construct the blueprint for the perfect world, which is what we do. But you see, both of them are connected. Building through thinking is of course connected to, so let's put it the other way around, to construct a priori the blueprint of the perfect world. That's only possible because we are building through thinking all the time.
Right.
We are building through thinking, hearing, seeing,
Yeah.
and letting show, etc.
Yeah.
I think. And this building is, then you could say, is to allow for something to be and to grow in its own way, in its own time. But in its own time. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's called.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, always be, because you could almost say, maybe this is a bit of an exaggeration, but maybe you could almost say that the world we have created is completely externalized. It's exhausted everything and has externalized everything. But I mean to say, we are building through thinking, but now we're constructing a priori blueprints for the perfect world that completely collapses every couple of weeks everywhere. I mean, you could just see that last week, if you know what I mean. So, if we try to go somewhere and here's the world as it should be, and let's just let's make everyone adapt to this one model that's completely timeless that we have invented, in this Platonistic madhouse and that we live, also called the cave, then we are not actually thinking, because we're not open to that which shows itself. And to that which, and then when we're building, we're not sitting there, I'm building. No, we are then actively doing something. That's that. But the thinking, so it comes first to see what there is, what is enough, and sort of also heed time in a different way, that it's not becoming a resource for this casino that the planet has become. And I'm just laughing because the Bitcoin people say that Bitcoin solves the problem of time-space continuum, and I'm thinking maybe that was never a problem to begin with, because maybe the relativity theory was wrong from the get-go. But also, it is quite telling that we think that all the world's problems can be solved with a currency. Why? So first of all, any problem you solve leads to more problems. That's the if not, then all of life would be over, just to mess with Karl Popper a bit. And at the same, why is it that a currency is going to save the world? Why not the way we interact with each other, completely without transaction? Perhaps maybe that's another way of responding to human relationships, right? That is, maybe it's not just purely transactional. Maybe it's just a thought,
Yes.
Just to wake the two people still listening up a bit. But I think it's very good that you picked up on what building through thinking, how I also have to be clearer on how to articulate it, so that it doesn't look like it's just a construction. At the same time, we would have to say also, of course, that this is momentary, and for us, for this century, and as I sometimes say to some people who are still young, let's make this our century. Why should we have the ideological battles of the 19th century spilling over into this one? Is there nothing else that we've got to worry about? And that it is not a construct to build through thinking, precisely because it is about letting something grow in its own time, letting something be in its own ways, and exist to stand out, while at the same time allowing the same for us. But that includes to admit to death and finitude and incapacity to control very often.
It's great.
So it's not going to be a very leisurely Scolaire, I'm afraid, that Ocrinia. We're not going to just be sitting there like Marcuse said and just wait for some desire-pleasing machine to come and do everything for us that we want. No. Right. It's Ocrinia Scolaire is ultimately, I think, about Medenagan, of nothing too much, and in a measured way, building, that means letting others, and others means human beings, plants, animals, etc., be insofar as insofar as possible, while at the same time, the joylessness of transactional relationships is at this point is just palpable, and you can see this in university buildings now. The joy of studying is completely sucked out of these buildings. No one's enjoying it because they're just, even if they don't pay, they're ultimately just there to get a degree, to get a job. That's a transaction. That's why you're there for. And I think that and that's an art itself, to be able to enjoy this.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. The other thing too is, I was just as we were talking about earlier, this comes back to, it's another element in here I think I'm hearing is, so I just my wife just gave birth to my son, and someone asked me the other day, and it was like 3 weeks ago, I think, and someone asked me the other day, how's Teague? That's his name. And I thought about it. I thought about him, and it struck me that every thought I had or picture I had of him was him being held. Right? Like, and I was like, that in some sense, he is continuous with this holding. Right? And I'm hearing that in some of these, the way that we're talking about these things turning and building and waiting, and in its own time, and listening. This, and I'm seeing this so much. I mean, this time around is my second kid. This is what's really standing out to me now, is this way where, oh my God, the way that we start, right, is fundamentally in holding, and everything of how he's doing is completely attuned to that holding, right, in some way. And something strikes me that there's something about that relationship that never stops. We're never not continuous with a holding in this way. I'm hearing that echoes of that in what we're saying as well. I think it's what it is. There's an intimacy there in that holding that I think it's not just ontic, right? It seems like it's ontological.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, go on.
I think that's it. I think I just keep hearing that in what we're saying, hearing echoes of that here.
Yeah, and it's being held and then having to hold.
Yeah.
One point and be allowing for being held again.
Yeah.
But at the same time being released.
Yeah.
From someone and by something.
Right.
While allowing for a return.
Yeah.
As you know, having to go out in order to return home, to quote Master Eckhart.
Having to hold himself, right?
Yeah, to hold
somehow
oneself.
This holding of him is going to be somehow deeply connected to whatever degree he can or can't hold himself.
Yeah,
right.
But in a technocratic civilization of the end times, that's already streamlined. It's already, that's all given.
Yeah.
And that has to do with this weird, with this dangerous a priori, where it's all problems solved before anything can at all occur.
Yeah.
And we try to live our lives like this, obviously.
Yeah.
You're guaranteed this, that, and the other if you fulfill step 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
did you? I mean, you put it on. Here's your life box. Play it well or something. But also but this, of course, itself is again only possible because of this other mode, which is itself holding. So there is, you see this need for being held also here. And that perhaps, I'll just say this as a little breadcrumb, that perhaps is the blind spot or the weakness of this. Is that it doesn't know what it actually lacks and needs and tries to provide in an artificial manner. Where this holding and then being held, but then also having to hold oneself ultimately. And then giving hold to someone else. In German, you also have the word Haltung. Haltung is posture, to be how you're composed, but also how or what kind of a stance you take. Haltung, which is halt, which is to finding a hold. To take a stance is to have taken a certain position, I think would be in English another way of putting it. Having found a stance and having taken it, and that is ultimately it's a mortal stance that we're describing here, because it's one that, as Heraclitus says, when new life is born, new death is born. And that is, today, that's so pessimistic. But Heraclitus has another fragment where he writes bios. So that's bios. And the Greek writing. And if you write this in the Latin alphabet that we use, it's spelled like this, bios, where you get biology from. But he has so he pronounces, he actually doesn't say bios as life, but bios as bow. And the bow is, and so this is what the Greeks allowed for, this playing with phonetic similarities and differences. There's just the pronunciation is different, the accent is different, the accent, the French would say, and by the accent being different, it's a different word. It's no longer life, but now it's bow. And the bow is, of course, you could say the arch or the bow of life, but it's also the bow and the arrow that can kill you. And so life itself as the bow is that which holds within itself death. So any growth contains within itself its own, not utter destruction, but its own moment of decay. And I think all this talk about complete collapse and meltdown of the economy that you can hear everywhere when you because people are interested in economics and finance now, because they feel something is off and they're losing, and also maybe currency will save the world, but at the same time the all this this extreme fear of collapse and fear mongering of collapse also is itself not capable of thinking growth and development, becoming an adult, growing up, coming into fruition without its own death inscribed and its own finitude inscribed in it also. That's lacking. And then all of this has to do with finding a stance in this beautiful image. This is why, you're my poet, right? As you know, every thinker needs a poet, because the thinker is not supposed to speak in images. Except if you're Plato, then you're perfectly fine to write myths. He's almost the only one who was able or capable. And so in that image of being held, then having to find hold for oneself, which is what you call becoming an adult, in order to give hold again or hold someone else again, and as you know, in the end being held yourself again, hopefully, is is this kind of scholatic,
Yeah.
if you like, oikonomia, is a household
Right.
that comes together under a certain nomos over which we have no control. We don't control the nomos of the economy. We'd like to, by positing, well, we'll have that much GDP next year and that much growth over here, and we can do this to a certain degree. Yes. But over the ultimate nomos, we don't have the ultimate law that posits us and challenges us, etc. We don't have any control.
Yeah.
We can't mess with it. And it's coming together here now for me also more than before, perhaps. Yeah, that this household of being held and giving hold and passing this being holding on, so that of course someone can go out and return.
Yes.
Yeah. You will never leave if you don't find.
Right.
You never leave and make your own way if you're completely. I mean, you can, but it will be more difficult.
Right.
If you've never been held properly.
Yes.
At least for some time.
Right. Right. And this kind of leaning into. Yeah, because it's interesting because there is, when you think about a lot of the language of the economy and all the crises, there's this awareness of being exposed to some kind of collapse, right? That necessitates to put it off and forever progress and don't let it happen.
Yeah.
Which is this weird sense in which, weird sense, it's like the more I'm defended, like, for example, like psychologically, like that we always talk about this a lot, like psychologically, the more defended you are psychologically, if you put a shell around yourself, is the moment you become brittle. But if you turn toward death, if you turn toward your mortality, if you're like, what I would say is like, you're no longer just exposed to the elements, but you actually turn toward, right, your own fate and what you're not yet capable of or can't control, is the moment, in some sense, you become invulnerable. Your vulnerability leads to proactive vulnerability, isn't exposure. It's like this, everything that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's the strangest thing, but I would agree. On the one hand, in the economy, there is the incapacity to let go and to let it slide, at least for a moment. But no, it has to continue. And of course, it will be possible to continue it further down the line. But I'm ultimately no longer really curious about how any of this ends, because as this is now a process that cannot be stopped, and that itself, this you can say progress in German is Fortschreiten, which by the way, or Fortschritt, which by the way can also mean to be already gone.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
He's really gone. He's really far off.
Yeah.
So it's progressing. It's this process is, but as this steps away, that leaves open.
Yeah.
It leaves it doesn't leave something open, but it provides just incisions or weird kind of what's over here that we've never even seen that could be over here. Let's put it like this.
Fissure or something. Yeah.
Yeah, fissure. Yeah. There's not there like it's a fissure. It's there's something else bubbling up.
Yeah.
And so but it's in essence it is an economy. So the word it is an entire household.
Yeah.
That comes into being and that has its prime and at best blooms and becomes wealthy and in all the ways in which a human household can be wealthy, which isn't just monetary or financial, or in terms, it's not just power either. but is joyfulness and the wealth of your family, etc. This is your family ties, I mean, and the inevitable, which is the tragic. And for every single one, it doesn't have to be, it's at some point any household will end, or but if so, it's not, and I'm not saying let's have this all, this is one of the things, let's have this all integrated or incorporated, and then it's going to be perfect for all times. No, it's still tragic. Finding a hold and giving hold to someone is the most arduous task, and mandate at the same time, of course. And not just, and there will not be a blueprint for this. So I think though that there are fissures now into which one can kind of step in and see what kind of mountain range
bubbles up. He's bubbling up little. Like, what? You hear that? So I feel like we're doing a lot in these kinds of conversations. There's a bunch of people going like, "Do you hear that? Where's that coming? Is that way far away, or is that like right behind my eyes? Where is that sound?" Yes, and that responding to it. Yes,
and but without there's no attempt to solve the world's problems. Actually, you can almost say facetiously it's the opposite. No, not the opposite, not trying to add to it. But it's a strong sense of something very anti-modern, which is the tragic sense to return. And that's fundamental to Scolaire. You don't find a hold fully in what is and what is not, if I think you believe that you can have all the world's problems solved with just one simple program. We like programs, study programs, for example. That's very weird. Are they programming people? It sounds awful. Why would you work in such an institution? Anyways, that's a difference. For a different time.
So the thing and I need to come to completion here pretty soon with the, one of the things that you said about like the tragic, right? And this thing that you've said a couple of times about joy, really like the joy of your family, like joy, and in this connection with that there's this connection between knowing it's going to end in tragedy, right, is inevitable. That is exactly what it seems like. If I eliminate that part, or I do some trick where that's not the case, I don't think I can maybe preserve what I'm looking at, right? I can hold on to it in some kind of weird way. I can be anxious about it, but I can't enjoy it, right? Like there's this way where this kind of thing, if I'm going to open to so for example, say I want to be in a relationship, right? And it's a big decision for me. If I open to that relationship, if in some way I'm closed to it not working out, then I'm simultaneously closed to the possibility of it working as well. There's like this whole opening that happens, it seems to me, that like, I just got this sense as you're talking about this, the tragic, that there's a enjoying it, experiencing genuine joy that upwells from this is precisely this openness to the whole thing, right? Including the tragedy, right?
And joy, but to step or arrive in joy, to enjoy, to be in it. Not just again, here. Is your dinner, enjoy. By the way, all waiters in the world, enjoy. The verb does need an object. You can't just enjoy.
Right.
Being It's getting late. No, but yeah,
Yes,
so
totally.
to step into joy, um, and uh, and be at the same time, but again, the I say this in closing, the the so the task though I think is a serious one and a crucial one, because we are messing massively with time. And that means that on the one hand, the future is becoming a black block that keeps getting pushed, this, which is the total collapse, which is everyone's scared of, apparently, especially the policymakers. And they keep pushing this further and further away by making new bets on time and warping it a bit more, which is also weird that we can do this also. At the same time, the past is just this museum, it seems now, right? This frozen past into which we can walk, a virtual reality almost. And we are somewhere in the twilight there. So, and in the twilight, it's very difficult to find a stance. Because you don't know what you're standing on.
Right. Right.
It's neither dark nor light.
Right.
And yeah.
Yet, well, there's the uncanny.
Yeah, maybe we have to say
what's so strange about this twilight is it's a twilight that doesn't disclose itself as this is you're in the twilight. It discloses itself as like, you'll never die.
Yeah. It's the twilight of the shopping mall, It's oh yeah. God. Yeah. Certainly not Eden, I tell you.
Yes. So great talking with you, my friend.
Thank you, good sir.
As always. All right.
2 years now. Okay.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.